Welcome to Straight Shot Politics. Each episode will bring you in-depth discussion with experts, community leaders, and analysts who will share their insights, experiences, and predictions. From local elections to global diplomacy, we'll provide you with the tools and perspectives you'll need to navigate today's real-world landscape.
Hello. Welcome, everybody. I am Lisa Chafee. Joining me today is my co-host, Michael Nash.
Hello.
In studio, live and in person, we have our Fraternal Order of Police President, Lieutenant Brian Steele, who is a 23-year law enforcement veteran with the Columbus Division of Police and a proud United States Marine Corps veteran, where he served as military police corrections specialist and a member of the Marine Embassy Suite Security Group. He currently serves as the president of Fraternal Order of Police Capital City Lodge Number 9, representing over 4,500 active and retired officers. Brian holds an associate's degree in criminal justice from County College of Morris, a bachelor's in business administration from Ohio Dominican University, a master's in public administration from Ohio University, and a certificate in African American studies from Sinclair College. He is a committed husband and father of 5, God bless you, and his eldest son, Jack, is currently serving as an infantryman in the United States Marine Corps. Thank you for joining us, Brian.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, a fellow Marine on the show. I've not had one of those yet.
No, we have not.
Yeah.
So we know here in Ohio that the Democrats and others are collecting signatures to get a constitutional amendment to remove qualified immunity. So for those of us who are not very well in tune, explain to us what qualified immunity is.
Qualified immunity is a legal doctrine, and it protects public service employees such as police officers, firefighters, teachers, social workers that all work for the government. It protects them from frivolous lawsuits, from harassment, as long as you're acting within the scope of your duty and what you're doing is reasonable. And we could definitely follow up and get more into that.
So to clarify, it is not a law. Congress has yet to pass a law on this. It just stems from a 1982 Supreme Court case, Harlow versus Fitzgerald, which didn't even involve a police officer. This had to do with the whistleblower regarding the Nixon White House, which is kind of crazy. So what is the benefit of qualified immunity?
So I'll just say these legal doctrines, everything we do for use of force is Graham versus Connor. Everything we do for search and seizure, Terry versus Ohio, if we're going to Terry stop you. So you have your laws, but officers and public servants also follow case law. And that's really it is. It's a legal doctrine, but it's case law. So what it does not do, it does not protect officers from misconduct. It's not some blanket of you could do anything you want, act in impunity. The courts say as long as you are reasonable, and I'll give you an example of something reasonable. A firefighter has qualified immunity. If a firefighter Heimlichs someone that's choking, in good faith, in the scope of his duty, he's trying to save them, and that person cracks their rib. That fireman cannot personally be sued. They could sue the city or the fire department, not the fireman. If qualified immunity is eroded and taken away, that fireman can now be personally sued for trying to do his job in good faith to save a life. And that's going to have drastic consequences on recruiting intention of all public service employees.
Right. And I want to make sure that our audience understands qualified immunity does not protect an officer from being prosecuted criminally should they be deemed necessary to do so. This is only regarding civil cases.
That's correct. It's civil cases, and as long as the courts say as long as the officer is within the scope of his duties and does not violate the person's Fourth Amendment rights, he has or she has qualified immunity. If they do violate someone's rights, the courts can waive qualified immunity, and that has happened before, and a lot of times rightfully so.
So I was reading an interesting article earlier about a case out in Minnesota where a county engineer decided to pull over a couple of truck drivers and hold them for 3 hours, not within the scope of his duties. He's an engineer, not a police officer, and got the local police involved. They wrote them tickets, and they tried to sue him, but the court said, no, he's got qualified immunity. So that is one, I think, valid argument but it comes down to the judge.
Yeah, sure. And I don't know the facts of that case, but I mean, that was up to that one judge, and there is always an appeal. There's an appeal process.
Right.
If that district judge did something that they don't think was appropriate, you could appeal that up all the way to the Supreme Court, but I don't know that case personally.
So do you think that there is a possibility of some kind of a compromise for qualified immunity?
I could tell you there'll always be outliers. There'll always be a case where almost like, hey, I got you, look at this one. But again, those are outliers. Overwhelming times the system works how it's supposed to work. There's a compromise everywhere. But I'll tell you what happened. If qualified immunity is eroded in Ohio, which I don't think it is, there's a reason they're trying to do this ballot initiative. Nobody in the state house, whether you're a D or an R, had any appetite for this. This is kind of bleed over from 2020 when officers were blamed for all society's failures. I don't see it really going anywhere, but we are going to fight it because it will have drastic negative outcomes. But again, I don't know if this group that's pushing it, which I think are all great people, by the way, I have nothing against them. I just think they have their ideologies and I have mine. I'm not aware of them ever talking to anybody. I work out of the state house. Generally, what happens is the municipal league, the Commerce Association, the FOP, we all sit down and talk about bills. I don't think they've talked to anybody. They're kind of on an island on their own.
That's interesting. So you brought up 2020. And since then, since the summer of George Floyd.
Summer of love, we call it.
Yeah. We've had a lot. It's just indescribable how much vitriol police officers are receiving. How has that affected recruitment? And do you think if we lose on this qualified immunity, what will be the outcomes?
Our recruiting and retention is so far down since 2020. It's hard to get individuals to stay on this job. We had buyouts. A lot of individuals are doing their minimum 25 and leaving. We're having a hard time hiring in this job. I'll use the city of Columbus. We'll hire about 100 people a year. We lose roughly 90 to 95 a year. It's very difficult to get somebody into public service, let alone policing right now, because of the vitriol in 2020. I know there is historically, police are responsible for some things. There are some black guys in police, but we were blamed for everything. Officers enforce the law. They don't write the laws. So if you want to talk about racism in policing, I tell everybody in a micro scale, let's talk about it. But let's talk about a macro scale. Let's talk about racism in banking and education and government, you name it, and hospitals. But nobody seems to want to talk about that. It was just all eyes were on police, and we were to blame for everything.
Yeah, and I think some of that stemmed from the media and what they're portraying. I mean, it wasn't just George Floyd. It was Michael Brown, the hands up, don't shoot kind of thing. A total failure, I believe, with some parents not holding their children accountable. We see this in our school system now with restorative justice. It's so wrong.
So also, too, there's a civilian review board that's been put into place.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that one.
Yeah. Civilian Review Board. I'm not sure where that's going. I haven't heard much about that. But wasn't that put in place, and perhaps I'm wrong, I'm not sure, wasn't that put into place just to be a civilian oversight to law enforcement?
Yeah, civilian review board is basically a paper tiger. That's why they don't really talk about it. It was the politicians at the time in the city of Columbus. It's like, look, we did something. They really have no teeth. As a president of the FOP, I have no problem with a civilian review board. We do work for the public as long as there's no bias going in there, as long as it's fair, it's impartial. But we don't really see that in a civilian review board. We see a bias all the time, and that's why we don't really pay it much attention.
Well, okay, so if we don't pay much attention, then do they have any kind of power to pass any kind of one legislation, second any kind of overview, oversight, any kind of internal investigation they have power over? Or
they can make recommendations, but they continuously embarrass themselves so much that they just, even the chief of police, I don't even think the mayor's office gives them any credibility.
Really?
It's just embarrassing, some of these cases that we find.
Okay.
Well, speaking of the mayor, let's talk a little bit about what's happening. We've seen it since Franklin, and I have several friends who are police officers who've told me they're literally, no pun intended, being handcuffed by essential executive orders coming from the mayor. No, you can't arrest for this charge, or you arrest them. We've seen it with the Kia boys, where they're stealing a car at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. They're caught, and by 6 o'clock, they're back out on the street. From the police officer's perspective, what's the mentality?
So we should probably kind of break it down who's in charge and how this works. So any misdemeanor crime will go through the city attorney's office, Zach Klein. Anything juvenile will go through the Court of Domestic Relations, and then anything a felony will go through Common Pleas Court. Misdemeanor crimes are prosecuted by the city attorney. The juvenile crimes and the felonies in the county are by now Ms. Shayla Favors, the new prosecutor. After 2020, we'll start with the misdemeanor crimes. There was this policy, summons lieu of arrest. And that was basically, officers were encouraged not to arrest somebody, just to give them a summons. So that sounds great in and of itself, but I'll use Huntington Bank. Huntington Bank gave money, campaign contributions to the ballot initiative for the Civilian Review Board. So right there, it was kind of almost like an anti-police mentality it seemed like Huntington was having. The reason I bring it to Huntington, I went there on a run once, and there was a homeless person who defecated in the lobby and wouldn't leave. And guess what? Huntington wanted him arrested. That is a nonviolent misdemeanor crime. He simply gets a ticket. Here's your ticket. Please don't do it again. As we go to walk away, the Huntington Bank manager is like, wait, you're not going to arrest him? Well, no, we're going to give him a summons. It's a nonviolent misdemeanor crime by what you call unhoused. That's the fancy word for you're homeless. And I think that now that extrapolate that hundreds of times, especially in the short north, thousands of times, the same people who voted for these laws and they wanted a more nicer, gentler police department, they got what they wanted. And look what happened to short north. Crime skyrocketed. Mm-hmm. Juvenile is a whole nother thing. We have this theory that if you put a juvenile, incarcerate him for 1 day, most likely to reoffend. So what are we doing? We're kicking the Kia boys out on the street over and over again. Some of these individuals have 5, 10, 15 felony arrests, car chases. It is absolutely insane. I'm a believer of restorative justice. I'm a product of juvenile restorative justice. If you have a nonviolent misdemeanor crime, you steal a candy bar from a store, let's get that kid help. If you're 15 and you do a drive-by shooting and kill a 66-year-old woman on Aberdeen, which happened on the North End, there's no rehabilitating you. You have to be removed from society because all you're going to do is kill more people.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but how do they, I guess, well, I don't know. My perception is that prosecution isn't effective, or they don't, or they just slap on a wrist and let them go. And that depends on who it is.
We have a new prosecutor now. We did not see these same issues when Ron O'Brien was here. Ron O'Brien was a serious lawman, and that's what the prosecutor's office does. The prosecutor's office is not supposed to be the chief social justice warrior. Your job is to take these cases from the police and ensure you prosecute. And if you want to put an emphasis on the most violent, let's do that. The Gary Tyack years was a complete failure in this county. All we did is we let murderers go. We indicted 4 cops for murder. There's a reason it's never happened before that. It was a complete political sham, and we just kicked violent offenders back on the street. Now that we have Miss Favors, she's been in office about 6 months. We're just kind of waiting and seeing. We're hoping that she's not going to repeat Gary Tyack's failures. I have a meeting with her in a couple weeks to kind of address some mutual issues, and I'll give her credit always for that. The last prosecutor did not want to meet with us at all. At least she wants to meet with us, and if we disagree, that's fine. But maybe we could find common ground.
Okay.
Well, I'm hoping some of the stuff that she mentioned during her campaign, which was anti-police, I'm hoping she has had a come to Jesus moment, if you will, and realized that's not what this city needs, and we do need to hold people accountable. That also means, unfortunately, in every career there are bad actors, and have been bad actor police officers. There's one on the run right now out there in Utah or somewhere. There's a former sheriff. So that's one of the arguments from the opposition that wants qualified immunity removed, is to say that police officers are hiding behind that. What do you say to them?
So I would submit to you, there is nobody under more layers of scrutiny and accountability to a police officer. And I'll tell you why. Let's say an officer discharges his weapon. Columbus Police might take around 1 million runs a year. Out of that 1 million runs, that's 1 million documented runs. there's probably 100 million actual undocumented citizen contacts. Think of how many people in one day a police officer talks to. We will discharge your weapon about 15 to 20 times a year. Again, sounds like a lot, but in a large city, as many officers have as many runs, it's really not that much. The chance of being shot by a Columbus police officer is 0.0028%, by the way. When an officer does discharge his weapon, he's going to be reviewed by all these layers: CPD Internal Affairs, the Civilian Review Board, the DIG, Department Inspector General, which we should talk about a little bit. BCI is a third-party independent investigation. If they believe he may have or she violated someone's rights, the DOJ is going to investigate them. A grand jury is 6, and a firearms review board. That right there is 7 layers of accountability that's going to look at that officer. People forget that. So when someone goes to court or they get no billed by the grand jury and they say, oh, the police covered it up. Well, if that's the case, you're thinking 7 different independent layers covered up. It's just not the truth. It's a fallacy.
And all this is documented, and it's all public record.
All
right?
public record.
Okay. So when people throw darts, do those same people throw darts ever go back and follow up and look at the public record? And is that made public enough to be more than obvious, or?
Yeah, I don't think so. You never let facts get in the way of a perfectly good argument, I like to say.
Well, you mentioned the Inspector General. Tell us about that.
So the Inspector General, the original budget, that was also ballot initiative. The original budget was $800,000 a year. Now this year's proposed budget is $3.7 million a year. Taxpayers are paying for Inspector General. I have complete faith and trust in Inspector General. I like having an Inspector General. Now, it's a question was, do taxpayers want this or not? When Internal Affairs handled citizen complaints in Columbus, we exonerated the officer 91% of the time. So 91% of the time, the officer was exonerated, and the activists, the naysayers said, well, you're obviously covering up, you're looking out for yourselves, so we're spending $7.3 million for a third-party independent investigator who's exonerating CPD 90% of the time. So the question is $3.7 million worth 1%? Yet maybe, maybe not. The reason you had the same outcome is overwhelmingly we get it right, and the times we get it wrong, whether it was IA or DOG, it was being uprooted. Misconduct will never be found where it doesn't exist. It'll never be hidden where it truly does. CPD, our suburbs, Frank County Sheriffs are some of the most professional law enforcement agencies in the country.
I have to say I've met quite a few of them, and I will always call when I need for help. And that's what's frustrating is we see these protests defund the police, but yet they call the police to have them there in case something happens.
And look who was defunding the police. Defunding the police was the dumbest thing ever. I went down there to City Hall and we were reimagining policing. And we talk about racism, which started all this in 2020. And I served in riots and protests. Not every riot was a protester. Not every protest was a riot. But you'd see someone stand up there. It was a white person that lived in Clintonville saying, defund the police. It was a white person that lived in Italian Village, defund the police. And then you'd get to a woman of color that lives in Oakland and Whittier. And you could look at this. This is on the city council. They'd be like, no, I want the police. Send me every cop you have. Defunding the police doesn't take money out of Brian Steele's checking account. It takes the money out of the people who need the police the most, right? Mm-hmm. We were accused by one city council member of being over-occupiers, over-policing community of colors. We go where crime is. Right now in the city of Columbus, 90% of our homicide victims are of color. 75% of our known homicide suspects, and it's 75 because that's all we know, are of color. If you look at the statistics, you have to ask yourself, why does the overwhelming majority of crime committed by people of color? And that's a fact. I would submit to you that the overwhelming majority of people of color do not commit crimes. But we have to look at that. Activists will just ask the question, why are you using force disproportionately on people of color? We use force. About 51% of our force is people of color who only commit or only make up about a third of the population, but again, are committing overwhelming majority of crimes. And when I say that as a white male, sometimes people back up like, oh, I don't think you could say that. Well, this is the fact. We talked about my background. I'm an MBA. I'm a stats guy. I like numbers. Now, why is this happening? The crime is in our challenged neighborhoods. Why is it crime ridden there? Well, we could talk about racism. We could talk about a failed education system. There's no job opportunity. It's hard to get out of the cycle. One-parent households. That's where we have to go further and really discuss to truly help a community.
Yeah, there's no, this is a giant puzzle. And there are so many different pieces that need to come into play. And it seems like the naysayers just want to focus on what the police are doing because the police are the ones who are actually enforcing the law. They're taking their loved ones away. And it's interesting that in 1985, in my research, I found that in Tennessee versus Garner, the Supreme Court ruled that deadly force against a fleeing suspect is unconstitutional unless the suspect poses a significant threat. So if an officer uses deadly force in a situation not clearly violating this precedent, then qualified immunity applies. So break that down a little bit. So if you catch someone, you're on patrol, you see a crime in progress, and the suspect flees.
Yeah.
What qualifies as deadly force?
Let's use Blendon as an example.
Okay.
Blendon officer walks up to the rear of the vehicle and the person drives away for committing a misdemeanor crime, and the officer shot and killed the lady. Qualified immunity could be stripped because, most likely, he would find himself in jail because there was no threat to him. There was no deadly threat. The person was driving away for non-misdemeanor crime. Now, look at Blendon Township. He was in front of the car. Whether tactics were good or bad has no bearing on whether he should use deadly force. If that person was fleeing to get away, that does not matter. He is now in danger. She drove into him. His feet were off the vehicle. He can now discharge his weapon. And that's where qualified immunity would imply.
And that was the case of the woman who had just robbed a liquor store, correct? And
Micaiah Bryant, and it was Officer Grubb who was charged with murder.
And that went to trial already, didn't it?
That one, it goes in July.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I just, the audacity of people these days. So we were talking earlier, seeing all these videos people posting on Facebook where all across the country, police officers are pulling someone over for a traffic violation and they're asking for their ID. No, I don't have to give you, the law says I don't have to give you my ID. It's utterly hilarious to watch just the stupidity of these people. It's like if a police officer asks you for your ID, you comply.
You 100% comply, and then if you feel you got wronged, if the officer was rude and discourteous, you have internal affairs. Every police department has a complaint line and a compliment line, by the way. We always talk about the complaint line. We forget the compliment line.
Right.
And that's why you have a court. And now with body cameras to me, when cameras first came out, I was against body cameras. I thought, this is going to be terrible. Who wants to be filmed all day long at work? They're the greatest thing to happen to law enforcement. I won't go anywhere without one. A majority of our complaints are exonerated simply from the body-worn camera. Yeah,
there's too much he said, she said when it comes to situations like that and people being rude and just, I'm just curious. Do you know off the top of your head, is it a law that you have to present your ID when asked for it?
So it depends. If an officer has a consensual counter, if I don't believe that criminal activity is afoot or you violated anything and I can't just walk up to you, this isn't the SS, I can't say, show me your papers. Mm-hmm. If I, the officer, believe that criminal activity is afoot, or if you committed a crime, you have to show your ID. I'll break this in layman terms. If I pull you over or I think you match the description of a suspect that just went out, it doesn't matter if you think you were speeding or if you don't think you match the description. It's what the officer believes, and you have to provide ID. If not, it's an arrestable offense.
Okay.
One of the other things I want to touch base on is I want to give our listeners a little bit of insight into the mind of a police officer. When you're dealing with a situation where you can't tell if a suspect or potential suspect has a weapon in their hand or if it's a cell phone, and you have literally a split second to make that judgment. Sometimes it's the right judgment, sometimes not, but it's you or him. What goes through an officer's mind?
So that is the crux of this. It's something that scholars, attorneys, professors, academics can study for months, years, is something that officer has a split second to make a decision. You fire too soon, you could, go to prison. You fire too late or hesitate, you're dead. We just lost an officer, and I'm not here to say he hesitated a couple weeks ago in Morrow County. I don't know the facts, but I know there was an individual with a gun, and that officer's dead. I know some officers that fired, they believe they saw a weapon, and they're charged with murder now. The courts were clear that you can make a mistake, and it does not make its murder. You have to look at the severity of the crime, whether the officer reasonably believed that a threat was being presented. Again, not anybody else but the officer, and that's how the juries have to look it through. I'll use the example of Officer Ricky Anderson and Donovan Lewis. Everybody knows that case. The media, what the media put out was he was asleep, and the officer shot him with a vape pen. Well, you hear that, you think, oh my God, the officers went in or killing somebody with a vape pen. And they also made it racism. They sued the city. They said it was racist. Donovan Lewis had a warrant. He had a warrant for a gun violation, a probation violation over illegally having a gun, and also assaulted, beat up in a domestic violence incident, his pregnant girlfriend. So the officers went to his house at 2 a.m. to arrest him. I think most citizens would want somebody who has a gun violation and beats up his pregnant girlfriend off our streets. The individual was not sleeping. We know for a fact he was not sleeping because when the canine dog went to go in the room, Mr. Lewis closed the door. When the officers opened the door, Mr. Lewis sat up, and in his hand he had a vape pen, and it was one of the bigger ones the size of a phone. The officer fired one shot. Clearly it's a mistake. It was not a gun, but he believed he had a gun based on that fact pattern going into it. And that's one of those ones that never should have been charged of murder. Now, clearly, an officer can't walk down the street, just see someone walking on the other side of the street, walking, a phone in his hand, walking their dog, and then just shooting the officer saying, oh, I thought that dog was, or I thought that phone was a gun. That wouldn't make sense.
Right.
Every one of these shootings have the same common denominator everywhere over the country. It was a failure to comply or resisting arrest out of a crime.
So would that fall under the reasonable force?
And that's the question. The question in the courts is it reasonable? And those should be found reasonable. Again, there was 4 cases we'll use. The Grubb is going to court. The Coy was convicted. Coy and Andre Hill shot and killed Andre Hill. Coy admitted he made a mistake. It should be covered under Graham versus Connor, the Supreme Court doctrine. That is going to be most likely retried or appealed because there was some evidence of prosecutorial misconduct. There was the case with Officer Grubb, which is going to court, and we have one more. Jason Mead was the sheriff's officer, shot and killed Casey Goodman. He was a mistrial. He'll get retried. Those are the 4 that were charged with murder.
Now, hearing about some of this stuff, you're saying that there's actually some thought or some decision-making process on behalf of the officer. Both you and I are Marines. We've been in combat before. We've been in that situation. We're given like a policy. We call it rules of engagement back then. I'm not sure what it's called nowadays, but it's like that. And is it large? Is it taught or trained or?
It is, and it's similar. It's a little bit different than rules of engagement, but we do have policies. There's policies when you could use force, and a lot of it is based off that Supreme Court law. What was the severity of the crime? Was the person actively resisting or fleeing? And is the life of yourself or someone else in danger? So if somebody's running away from me for stealing a car, and I can't just shoot him in the back, right? If somebody just shot at me and now he's running away and he still has a gun in his hand and I believe he's a danger, or he's running to a shopping center and you see children and you think, well, I can't let this guy get to the children, you could 100% shoot him in the back. We're allowed to shoot you in the back. And that's what Tennessee and Gardner talks about. It's not just for being a fleeing felon. There's got to be that life-threatening risk of bodily harm to yourself or someone else.
Okay. So there's a policy. Is it published, or is it like a trained, or is it so? And essentially, there's just as you and I are both aware, when things are happening in front of you, that policy, that process, that training goes through our mind, and training is for essentially reacting as opposed to thinking. You want to remove as much thought as possible out of making a decision about a situation, because thinking and making decisions takes too long most of the time. So training is important. And
100%.
How is that? Is that training, and is that scenario-based information policy published and available? Is that ever considered in acts of force, or ever considered in immunity cases?
Yeah, 100%. They'll look at some of the stuff. And some training is better than the other training. I always say, and for law enforcement, we could always train more. I think that's where, I'll say me as the FOP president and let's say an anti-police activist, we could probably agree there that more training is better. I tell everybody, you know why Navy SEALs are so good at what they do? Unlimited funding, unlimited budget, and they train constantly. Police officers, our firearms training, most will tell you it could be a lot better. Our force-on-force training, our any kind of training, it's just there's not enough time in the day. We do some, but we could definitely do more.
Gotcha. Last year I went through OPATA training, and I got my certificate and everything, but there was just 20 hours, and that was very little as far as, and that was for a security guard, a basic security guard training, and I was taught by a former cop, and I was at a facility that is owned by cops, so it was a very good training, but it was only 20 hours worth of data. There was some practice, there was some certification, there was some evaluation of shooting and those sort of things. But it's somewhat training, and there was some legal stuff in there as well. So with that little bit, I mean, I know we're kind of veering off course with talking about security guards, but it's possible that security guards could fall into the trap of, is there a qualified immunity? It could be a training in their department. It could be their policies or their company and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and most of it will be based off the Supreme Court doctrine, Graham versus Connor. But you're absolutely right. I think police officer in Ohio now is about 650 or 700 hours of academy training, and then you have your 15 weeks of coaching. But every agency is different. I'm just speaking towards Columbus Police. You might have a smaller village that just might have the bare minimum, and I don't know what that is.
Okay.
So in an ideal world, what would you do as far as training? And obviously, Mike, you guys are right. I mean, when you start thinking, you get too much in your head as an officer, you're putting your life on the line. So we know just from what I see on TV, and I'm a devout fan of TV shows like Blue Bloods and NCIS, but that's not the real world. So what would you do if you could create your fantasy of training for police officers?
We all have to do the state minimum standards, and a state minimum standards for OPATA, for example, it calls its marksmanship training. You have 30 seconds, 6 rounds, change position, reload once. That's good stuff, but you have to do more shoot, no shoot, more high stress. You'll get more out of running 50 yards, doing 20 push-ups, and now have a shoot, don't shoot. They'll turn a target. One might be someone with a gun. The other might be a child holding a book. When you don't have stress, it's easy to do it. When you get a police-involved shooting, and I was in a police-involved shooting, you have tunnel vision. Everything closes. Your heart rate completely spikes, and it's a completely different set of stress than standing there on a firing line, which is why we'll do the push-ups, we'll run to do it. We just don't do it enough. There's not enough time. There's not enough money. If it was a perfect world and I had all the purse strings and I was in charge of everything, at least once a week, the officers would be going down there at least for an hour a day and going through shoot, don't shoot scenarios. It don't matter if you did it a million times. There are times, outliers, where you'll still get it wrong. I said the other day in a media, this is one of the most impossible jobs in the world. You're held to such a standard. Policing is the easiest job in the world to people who've never done it, right? Everybody tells you exactly how to do it. It changes every day. Not every day is the Alamo. You can go from really boring, nothing going on, to one of the most high-stress, deadly incidents ever. The shooting the other day in Mifflin Township, that was a simple traffic stop. That was nothing huge. It wasn't a bank robber they were after, and look what happened.
It's insane. And I was just looking at some statistics. In 2024, nationally, we lost 165 police officers in the line of duty, and 49 of those were gunfire. Now, it doesn't say if it was what the situations were. Here in Ohio, so far, we've had 25, I believe, this year. A little bit less. It makes me sad. What can we do as citizens to help the police?
Well, I could see if you see a police officer that looks like he's having difficulty. Let's say you see a police officer on the side of the road fighting with someone. I'll tell you what you don't do. You don't get out your phone and start videoing for TikTok. There's nothing worse than when I see that. Now, I don't expect a citizen to run in and get involved in the altercation, although some do, and that's great on them. Call 911, honk your horn. You be safe, but do something. Get somewhere safe and flag down another police car. Just do something other than filming it on TikTok. And I watch those videos all the time, and they're just absolutely sickening. Just support your police. That's it. That doesn't mean you have to agree with every single thing. And, you know, a lot of times someone will say to me, oh, you know, I don't like the police because I had a bad interaction once. I said, tell me about that. And they'll be like, well, 3 years ago I was pulled over. I got a ticket and a cop was rude. I said, great. I said, you like Starbucks? And they'll say, yeah. I say, how many times have you been there? 100 times. You ever have a bad cup of coffee? Well, yeah, I did this one time. Did you stop going? You know what I mean? That's just a one incident. I've worked overwhelming communities of color. Even though I've had some issues and I've had a couple of people of color try to kill me, that's not how I view the community I serve. Overwhelming majority of the community, outstanding people I love. So my point is, because you had one bad influence or one bad situation with a cop or a bad influence with a Starbucks barista or a person of color, don't let that paint a broad brush on everybody, if that made sense. It
does make sense. Absolutely. And with that, civilians helping out police. I don't want to go down this weird road here, but we're talking about it. Okay. As a CCW permit holder, okay, somebody like that, like me, rolls up on a situation where there's a cop by themselves. They're having trouble. And I don't know, I guess there's no qualified immunity for a civilian.
Sure.
There's just liability, period. And then there's how much cash do you have to defend yourself? So if you're trying to defend a policeman, I guess my imagination runs into many different directions, but is that typically welcomed? If I had to draw my weapon and defend a cop, right, who's having issues, how is that viewed?
Well, let's take it as an officer. Let's say you have CCW, you walk down the street and there's a 90-year-old lady being raped. Was the first thing that would come through your mind, oh, is there a liability issue here? Or you're going to take action to help?
Take action to help.
Sure. Now, what's different with the officer is the officer's armed and he doesn't know who you are. So one, if you're carrying a CCW, if you're carrying a gun, I would recommend you get some kind of liability insurance. And they have them. There's tons of companies out there. Same with you're driving a car. You never drive a car without some kind of insurance. Where I would just be a little careful, again, that officer is already high stressed. He's already fighting someone. If it was me, I'll just use me as an off-duty officer because he doesn't know the difference between you and I. I'm going to make commands. I'm going to yell as loud as I can, as far away as I'm approaching, and I'm going to yell. I'm a citizen. I'm a police officer. I'm a CCW officer. Do you want my help? He's either going to yell, no, stand back, or he's going to yell, yes. I guarantee if this person is mounted on top of him, pounding, and I see you coming, you're my savior. But again, every situation is going to be different. Just make sure you communicate and be vocal.
Okay. And that makes sense, too, for not just that police officer, but what if that police officer calls for backup and the backup is coming? And here comes the backup 10 feet behind you.
Yep.
Or what if there's a helicopter flying over and they, and the police officer flashed them, say, hey, I need help. And, you're the guy there doing this, right?
And they don't know who you are.
Holding the gun in front of you. Yeah, that's a risk. That's part of the imagination I'm talking about. But if I can save a life, or help somebody, help a police officer in trouble to do that, then to me, it's worth my risk to do that.
Sure. Listen, I used to work plainclothes. Plainclothes is dangerous for that reason because your own department don't know who you are. I had officers draw down on me before, and that's one of the reasons we changed some of our policies. Now, plainclothes, we're not supposed to get involved unless it's life-threatening like that, but you're in the same outcome, and that's just a risk you take. And maybe after a couple of years, one of the reasons I stopped working plainclothes, I was sick of cops pulling guns on me,
Oh, I can't even begin to imagine how frustrating that would have been.
Yeah. And they know who you are. And these are people I work with. But in the moment, when it's a high-stress gun run, a shooting, you're not putting two and two together right off the bat.
People know you, they pull on you?
They didn't know me at that moment,
Okay.
Yeah, because of the high stress, cortisol level bumping. But
well, not only that, but how many times have you routinely see someone in a uniform, and the first time you see them out of uniform, you don't recognize them?
100%.
It's that I've done that multiple times, whether it's police or a doctor, or it's an easy mistake to make.
Sure.
Oh my gosh. So what I want to stress to people is if you're approached by someone asking you to sign the petition to get qualified immunity on the ballot, please understand, number one, this is not a law. They're asking for a constitutional amendment. And the left our Constitution here in Ohio has been changed over 170 times because people don't like what they're doing at the State House, so they try to do an end run, and they're not happy. This could have very serious ramifications. And for those people, aside from could result in a decrease in recruitment, which means we're less safe because there's not going to be as many police officers available when you're calling 911 because someone's trying to break into your house. They're dealing with another situation. There's not another available officer. But when it comes down to it, if they remove the qualified immunity, who's going to be paying for any of those lawsuits? It's going to come out of our tax dollars.
It will. If you can get an insurance company that will hold your policy, that's one issue. But what's going to happen is cities are going to have to try to find insurance companies to take out some kind of liability insurance, and it's going to get passed right to you, the taxpayer. And I just think it's important that people know. Number one, if someone asks me, should I sign this or not, I'll never tell anybody what to sign, how to vote. I'll say just no. Just know what this is before you go. There will only be detrimental to police, again, fire, social worker, teachers. There's a lot of individuals. This is paramedics.
Well, and a lot of people don't realize qualified immunity protects all government workers. So, yeah, unfortunately, that protects our politicians, too, who we know are doing some bad actor things. Yep. But you got to
have different kind of immunity. Some of those have sovereign immunity, qualified immunity, absolute immunity. They have different kind of immunities. But we'll use a teacher. Right now, your kid gets an F, you're not going to sue your teacher. If your kid gets an F, in theory, they can go sue the teacher. Now, if they sued the teacher and found out the teacher showed up every day at work on crack and lied on a resume, then qualified immunity could be lifted. If it's just your kid got a bad grade, who's going to be a teacher knowing they can be sued?
Right.
I could write you a ticket, and if I didn't have qualified immunity, you can go right down to the courthouse and put a lien on my home personally because I wrote you a ticket. That's why this is so completely insane concept.
So the crux of it is, don't break the law.
Yeah, 100%. And for the officers and for the firefighters and paramedics and teachers is, act in the scope of your official duties reasonably, which they do overwhelming majority of the time. And the times they don't, they're held responsible.
Exactly. Brian Steele, president of the Fraternal Order of Police, thank you so much for joining us on Straight Shot Politics.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Appreciate it.